Welcome to the Art of Being Nimble podcast. I'm Glenn Smith and I'm your host. In this series, we'll introduce you to business leaders from around the world who will on interview about how they've overcome challenges of operating a business in today's dynamic world. Through their stories, we're going to hear about what problems they've had and how they fixed them and the benefits it's brought them. Importantly, you're going to learn some lessons about what you can then use in your organisation to do similar things. So let's get on with the show and hear the next story. Today, I'm joined by Jason Sprague, Principal at Sprague & Co., a seasoned leader in driving enterprise transformation across sectors like infrastructure, energy and health. He's a master of the holistic approach that connects digital innovation with business strategy, ensuring every part of an organisation is aligned. Today, we're diving into the build versus buy decision, a dilemma often framed as an IT issue, but relevant to every corner of the enterprise. Whether it's choosing between in-house manufacturing versus outsourcing, or deciding on custom development tools over the off-the-shelf solutions, the stakes are high and the impact is far-reaching. Jason will share real-world examples, like the space industry's logistics challenge in transporting specialised equipment like rockets. This will highlight the complexities of integrating supply chains and the trade-offs between control, risk and cost. So stay tuned as we explore these decisions, uncover their hidden complexities, and provide you with the insights you need to make the right choice for your organisation. So Jason, let's talk about build versus buy. What do you want to talk about?
Well, what do I want to talk about? The importance of how many of our operating models have agility based on our decision if we're building something or buying it. And building it, of course, means, does the organization own it? Do we have full control over it? And how are we deploying it? And the buy is, can I get it from a third party? Does it fit with my operating model? And does it, shall we say, provide me the benefits that purchase is required for the agility of my organization?
So you said in a very concise way what sounds like there's a lot of thought processes and lots of trade-off conversations we need to have to work out whether that's something we need to build versus buy.
You're 100%. But before we start, Glenn, you the expert, you got to tell me, what is agility for you?
What's agility for me? Oh, I like it. You're making me. You're turning into the interviewer already. To me, agility is for an organization to be able to react to data points much earlier than traditional ways of working. So to take data points, to be able to learn from that and test new hypothesis of whether something I've observed is useful to them.
Oh, interesting. That feels like you've been quoting the Deming School of total quality management, the Toyota system. I agree with you, but to me, agility is much more about, I think you say early, but to me, is the ability to do what I need to do it against the strategy that I want to deliver. Mm-hmm. When you say early, I would struggle to say that I've ever been a part of or worked with a senior person who has the indicators that are actually leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators. Let's take about lagging indicators in the buy piece. Most contracts, most data that you buy something with and you have a commercial relationship are lagging indicators. Mm-hmm. Every contract and commissioning environment that I've ever set up, people are focused on how well we've done, not what we need to do, and having that canary in the coal mine to achieve that level of success in that commercial arrangement, especially where we throw about terms of partnering and integration, where we in essence are saying to a third party, I trust your organization enough to have intimate knowledge of my organization and operate within my commercial boundaries. And that is really hard to do, to achieve what you described, which is knowing something is good or bad as early as possible and to be able to change it if needed.
Yes, and I would also concur that many organizations that I work with And I should put my asterisk now that as a consultant, I help organizations who need to improve. Yes, a lot of them have lagging indicators and are very weak on leading indicators. To know, and the way I'm interested to know how you describe it to when you're working with that. But to me, a leading indicator would be useful for an organization to know. I have a view of the destination. The leading indicator gives me confidence that I still want to go to the destination, and am I heading in the right direction if that's what I want to still do?
Exactly. Now, underpinning that, I call it the S word, strategy. What am I doing and why am I doing it? Glenn, your expertise and your career, how many times have you come in and the problem is that people can't tell you what they want and why they want it because they haven't figured out what does good look like at what period of time? Business is a positivistic game. You have to say, I want this, and I'm going to achieve this image at this time in the future, be it customer satisfaction terms, be it in production terms, if you have a factory. What are those metrics that say, I am successful if? The vast majority, especially of organizations who are startups or in public sector organizations, they are looking at the end of their nose and they haven't gone out and defined what good looks like at that milestone. So it's really hard to develop those leading indicators if you don't know what you're measuring and why you're measuring it for that point in time. So I think in all of the approaches to developing in the build and buy, you still have to do the base work in that initial investment case, because upfront, to build something or buy something, you have to compare how much control do I want? Do I have the strategy in place to know what it is if I'm successful? And what are my trade-offs? And I have a whole list of trade-offs for you, but but realistically, the build versus buy will never be a panacea. Both will have rules of thumb when you should use them, which we can go over, but they will never, ever answer all of the, well, it's business, right? So you'll never get it right the first time. So we need to build in agility to achieving that target of what good looks like in the future. So we'll call that thing. But my question to you, because I like interviewing the interviewer, is what are your top 2 limitations to agility? So you've told me that agility is about numbers. I've been enjoying this question with many others in my professional projects at the moment. What are the 2 blockers to you for the appropriate agility in the build versus buy?
I would say for me, what I've experienced is organizations seem to want agility, but seem to also still be stuck in the past and want the certainty of a plan that agility doesn't necessarily honor them, because that will be a reactive plan. And so they like to see 3 years in advance, step by step. And those 2 things are counter to each other.
But now you are bringing up really, and I'm assuming we're reaching a global audience with this conversation, because as you can tell, the accent is not Bristolian, where I currently live. There, in the British context, is a challenge of wanting to have certainty of that outcome before they begin. Whereas in Northern Europe, especially in the Dutch context, they're very comfortable starting to find out what the journey looks like. In the American context, it's all over the place, and it mainly is try to do it as quickly as you can, and if it fails, burn it down, start again. Culture matters when building this capability with any business, and it also has a huge impact on the types of contract design that you do. You're describing what I call the British crystal ball. The number of senior leaders that I work with that say, I'm not going to start until I have certainty that I can achieve it. How do you achieve something that's not been known? So whether that being the buy process of defining the KPIs for the contract, the service levels, and trying to be hard-nosed in negotiation, but at the same time saying, oh, we're partners. How do we deal with that risk? And then the second piece is in the build bit is how many times does CFO say, Why are we having so much standing cost? Why is this important to my business model? All I see is investment cost. When does this start turning out and creating me cash flow? So those two pieces, if you buy it, the assumption is that your cash flow, assuming this is a for-profit business or a delivery environment, is going to come a lot quicker than if you build it, because you have to go through a maturity phase. We discount maturity. So the number of senior leaders that I've worked with that say, I just want it to work, but aren't willing to go through the very messy chaos of what would be beginning maturity, repeatable maturity, and standardized maturity. It's very important.
And in that instance, what comes to my mind is a behavior I see in many different facets of leadership, because they're busy boys and girls. And so often they make a decision and then it almost feels like they're then outsourcing the leadership of that delivery, and then wonder why, because they haven't had hands on the wheel, that they go off course.
Exactly. So issue number one, what is leadership? What is partnership? And where does agility in commercial sense of build versus buy come into it? So you've leaned right in here to the talking point that I want to talk about, which is, what is, assuming that the organization paying is called client, if they're buying something, what does that relationship look like? On the supply side, we have account managers, and the answer is do whatever until it's outside the bounds of the contract. And then depending on how you bid it for profitability of that contract, you then end up having a bit of head banging to figure out how the costs are going to change. Now, that is absolutely exhausting, and to me reduces agility. So if a large company I was working with in Alabama, they're part of this emerging American tech sector around space. Of course, out of Montgomery and Mobile areas, you have a huge tech sector. Now they're trying to create the infrastructure to create a commercial space environment. One of the main companies there is trying to do the logistics. How do we tie these things together? And they want, the trouble is that shall we say, the architects of this cluster is not saying how they expect the level 1, level 2, and level 3 producers, supply chain partners, to integrate their logistics problem. So now you're beginning to have people that are trading off the logistics for just in time, because you opened up for Deming, so we should lean into Deming, just in time and lean manufacturing for high tech, mission critical, small market things. However, shipping is a commodity. But is it? So you're moving bespoke products, and if you're moving those bespoke products, the question we've been debating is how much specialized trucking equipment is necessary. So if you're moving a rocket, you're probably not going to move that on a standard lorry bed or a standard tractor trailer. So I'm working with the large trucking company who sent a whole raft of account managers in. They're trying to build and inform people of the build versus buy. They're going in and they're doing the requirements. They're saying, if you go X number of miles, which generally is about 700 miles a month, and you need resilience, we're a partner for you, because we can give you service levels that in essence is transport as a service with 90-minute failure windows. The question for these medium and small suppliers is, are they wanting to meet a very large international SLAs on the risk that their small logistics team would be able to do that? So that's the small end. The big end, they're saying you're doing bespoke infrastructure, all of that, and you want a finance question. So they are selling to the big guys. Who's going to front the upfront capital cost of pretty complex supply chain, both purchasing of tractors and the beds that they pull, to begin to meet economies of scale? You can do it yourself, but you're going to have a capital outlay and it's not a core to your business. Can you access that capital? So you can already see, just in that simplistics of moving something from A to B in an integrated supply chain that's geographically separated by a few hundred miles, who's the leader, how and who's going to have power. And the underlying skinny of it, forgive the colloquialism, is that the larger suppliers want control. And they want to be able to say, this is what the commercial arrangements and performance arrangements look like, but then aren't willing to take the risk, meaning they aren't willing to own the supply chain contracts for that build, for that buy decision. But they also aren't willing to raise the capital to buy a fleet of specialized materials to do, in essence, a distributed 700-mile long just-in-time production system. So what is that trade-off?
And I was just maybe thinking, as you were talking there about some of those challenges, is that in what you're seeing, is that being driven by maybe procurement teams who have a tendency to push risk onto their suppliers in the name of protecting the organization, or is that being driven by a business need by the true demand side of that organization that wants that custom specific transportation need for that business? Right.
And you're asking two questions. So do I understand correctly? You're saying, is procurement driving this relationship? Or in essence, is it the demand side, meaning the production managers who are responsible of the just-in-time production schedule, are they driving it? The answer is neither are driving it. Because they don't know what they don't know yet, and because transport isn't as critical as the technology specifications, they're very, very focused on buying the components, but the assembly piece, integrating this into a device that leaves the Earth's surface and then transporting it appropriately. The question is, who is going to take that risk and be, shall we say, the drummer to brigade everybody into step? And that's right now the messiness of what's happening in that sector. So the interesting bit about this is that the supply chain partners who have they are a commodity. You're talking America is built on trucking. America, everywhere you go, it's long haul overground trucking from point to point, where you have huge different distances between production facilities. Now, just like we've seen in the airline industry, the space industry is trying to also coalesce in a smaller geographic area. If you are the one that owns a preponderance in the majority of those supply contracts, you have a power for a commodity, almost like if you own an oil field. So the question becomes should there be, the procurement people are saying, should there be a framework called off by everybody and that we have a trusted partner as an equal? Or is this just something that we think of as it's critical, but we want to have an operating market? And this is what I see in my work in Britain quite a lot, where people want to have the risk reduction of partnership and control, but they want the prices of a commodity and the bit to choose from a wide market. These really are two opposite ends, and people time and time again in my work are choosing one from one side of the spectrum, one from the other, and trying to create a commercial arrangement which doesn't work for anybody when they're building it. And when they're buying it, but when they're building it, they aren't going through, they want to go from standing start to sprinting so quickly. And this is where we again see project failure time and time again.
And the fact that you opened with strategy, knowing the what and the why, is that wanting the cake and eating it for that both sides of those benefits you just talked about? Is that because their strategy in that space isn't mature enough?
I think strategy and leadership, and you opened up and said, many of the folks are very, very busy. Your good organizations that are being successful that we rarely hear about, they have these problems, but they also build in more time up front to mature their systems. Mm-hmm. So I don't care if you build it or buy it. What we don't see in practicality of people talking about it is what is it for the ramp up and the embedding bit. If you buy it, we think we can mobilize it. Lots of times you see a 6-week window and that you're expecting it to be just fitting in. Now, if it's been done time and time again, so let's talk about the auto industry. The auto industry has been doing similar supply chain integration for 80 years. Okay, that's fine. So it's doing something that's been done before. Going to putting your risk and resilience hat on, if you're doing something with a new level of production in the physical sense that hasn't been done before, there seems to be an over optimism that sneaks in, and we see that always take longer, upwards of 400% longer to achieve the level of standardization that we expect. And the pragmatism that I've been told, and Glenn, I'm sure you'll represent this, is we just need to get on and do it. We just need to press the system and everybody will fall in line. And sadly, people are not automatons, and people don't mature that quickly in the way they're working together.
No, I would agree. And when I hear organizations saying we need this, it's done with an expectation that, well, I've said we need it and therefore magic will happen and everything will just fall into place. It makes me think, you were talking about, when we were just talking just now about, the car industry has been doing it for 80 years. Well, you've got 80 years of experience, then it's quite easy. But if you're doing anything new for the first time, it's going to be harder. And a book I read, when was it, last year or the year before now, I think, not last year, Bent Flyberg's, How Big Things Get Done, articulates, as something that we all know, when we do something that's new and innovative for the first time, it's likely to be late and expensive and not necessarily meet the customer demands unless we're really careful about it. So that feels like that trucking environment for space requirements is in that sort of, no pun intended, space.
It is. And you bring up one of my favorite books around the pragmatism of major projects and major paradigm shifts. Brent's book is the examples he uses in taking Sydney, for example, in the Opera House. I mean, if people haven't read it, they really should. The first 4 chapters have been it's almost an insight into my past 20 years of professional work and business model agility change. What we don't talk about is the planning and experimentation up front. So whether you're building or buying, you have to build in, forgive the pun, the opportunity to test it and to figure out what that is. Now, I give an example in the infrastructure bit. There's a large water company that has a huge asset management challenge. The question is that, going back to our issue of culture, that we don't necessarily know what the right answer is. The question is, how do we get more than one pair of eyes on a significant problem to develop an investment plan and to brigade a very widespread but mission critical supply chain, because of course water in any country, especially in the UK, is a massive system. So they came up with something that was actually quite insightful, which is commissioning 3 organizations in time-boxed ways to build tests and do that research to see which one of these 3 outcomes is going to be the best against the various emerging outcomes. They didn't necessarily have a great outcome specification. They had lots of input specifications because of early water change. And the issue is, how do they achieve the regulators' outcomes in a timely way? And it was interesting from this a few years ago now, but when the CFO says, what am I paying for? And the program director says, you're paying for certainty and removing risk now, instead of when we're opening the ground and finding we're not achieving the outcomes that we need to. So by having that multiple supply chain partner, almost competition, but everybody paid to share care and build something. That's an interesting hybrid where the water company is never going to own that, because it would be too costly, and they need to build it, but they need to time box it, and they need to have more than one loan partner to do it.
And so in that instance, was it three companies exploring the same problem?
It was same problem. So in essence, it's what's the asset management and renewal function? How does it look like? How do we build it? How do we cost it? What would you guys, and then, sending them away, giving them a time boxed bit, coming back with their research, their engineering approaches, and then saying, of these, almost in a star chamber type of Dragon's Den bit, which one is going to fit the capabilities that we need for our organization?
Sure. So diversifying diverging the thinking to get the different options. And it sounds like when you mentioned that the CFO asked the question, and I like that answer, we're sort of removing the risk and buying that certainty now, actually making an investment in information and knowledge, which is often something organizations don't seem to value.
No, and my work spanning the physical and digital, the vast majority of time is people will say, the word just skips 3 or 4 levels of complexity and oversimplifies generally the digital information in commercial pieces. So yesterday, in conversation and preparation of getting my thoughts in order to speak with you, Glenn, yesterday I asked a person who's leading some really, really large programs the same question I asked you about what constrains or what impacts agility. Full stop, 2 things. Understanding your commercial arrangement if you choose to buy it. 9 times out of 10, let's take PFIs in the UK, private finance initiatives. The number of people, when they get let, there's lots of money, and by the time you meet 2/3 away through the lifespan of that, there's no money, and yet service drops off and there's no money to make it better. These types of things. But she held up and said, quite frankly, building contracts that assume the version that you agree when you start is the version you're going to end up with. So we're not seeing agility put into contracts easily. In the infrastructure space, the NEC, the new engineering contract, which tends to be a British standard, has a project management functionality. There is some ability to, I think they've even written in an agility function into the civil engineering approach. But for the most part, especially large capital programs, you wait to the end and you fight about, did you get what you bought? But that isn't, I don't think, the agility that we're talking about, which is an integrated service within an organization. And is that mission critical? So that's the other thing that they said. Is it mission critical? Is it part of my unique selling point? Is it something that if I don't have, I am not unique in my market in a for-profit sense? Or is it a commodity? And if it's a commodity, how do I really believe it to be a commodity? And the example for that agility would be taking Amazon and its Prime membership. We brought that up and teased it apart. One of the things I think Jeff Bezos has gotten right with that company is the ability to use cost centers as profit centers. So the Prime, according to their last financial disclosure, according to the Prime piece of their transport network, they thought that the customer satisfaction of owning both a build and a buy arrangement where they own 60% or 50%-ish of the vast majority of their strategic delivery network, and then they top it up. So that's an example that I've used in all of my projects where I talk about it's not just build or it's not just buy. Last week, I was talking with folks that spend about 30 or 35 million a year on infrastructure. And we're talking about to keep that infrastructure going, I want the most critical things for that infrastructure to be under my control. So they are investing in the capability, the business capability of the people, the technology, the tools to have that full control. And they're using that then to inform the specification to have support from the supply chain to say, you can be a supplier, you can help us, you can work hand in hand next door to us if you can do this type of work to this type of level. And that specification is what I call a top-up model, which gives you both a build and a buy and asks for more flexibility. But the CFOs then push back a bit and say, I have a standing cost of £5 million for that capability, and then you want me to spend another 5 for only a third more work output. And the answer is yes, because that deals with your risk, that deals with your resiliency, that deals with any unexplained instances. So if you don't want to deal with the unknown, we don't use a buy function to top up the capability we have. So the trade-off to the CFO is always, how comfortable are you with risk and resilience? And I can't say I've ever gotten a straight answer in that conversation ever.
It seems that there was a few examples there, Jason, and it feels to me like there's a golden thread through all of them, which is knowing what, and again, I suppose we could link this back to strategies, but what is that competitive advantage of that enterprise to know where your strengths are? And when I a thought that comes to my mind is, as Netflix, they're a digital native, but we may think of them as that they're a television film viewing service, but when you think about it, they built their own content delivery network because actually for them, you can have the best film and TV in the world, but if it doesn't get to your device when you want it, doesn't matter. And so for them, that was they're seen as that. So it was interesting, like you talk about the Amazon logistics and owning that end to end. More companies seem to be interested in taking more ownership. And of course, ownership doesn't, as you quite rightly said, doesn't necessarily mean it's Amazon employees coming to your door, but they own the processes. So it feels more like there's more, and maybe this is agility. It's not either or, it's the blend.
Well, there you go. And I was hoping we would get to this point. I think so my definition of agility is the ability to have as much control as I can afford, as low a risk as I wish to achieve, but topping up that model with market partners, with the exception of saying, if it's mission critical, if no one else could do it. So the Netflix content delivery network, that CDN, Netflix wouldn't want to share it with someone else. It's core to their competitive advantage. And I think this is where you see expansion and divestiture of what we're seeing now in the energy space. What is core to that organization? I feel like I'm back at business school, but in essence, what is core to that competitive advantage? What capability are you going to invest? And if you want it to be agile, are you willing to bear the non-productive standing cost of it? If it needs to be effective 100% of the time, because you can't build for 100% of the time, you have to build over 100% of the time, because you have to have resilience and contingency built within that. Just in a project I had today, unexpectedly, someone had to be out, small team in a high-tech world. That project will pause, and it's mission critical. But that person is a knowledge worker, is on the critical path, and is the only one that's going to complete that. If you scale that up into large organizations, this is where we see things such as critical chain, and I'm a big fan of using critical chain as a planning function within contracts, because it is very clear. Critical chain is a resource plan as opposed to a time planning approach. And that that's where you have people named with specific critical knowledge. If you're going to build a partnership, their employment contract, I've even seen this, becomes conditions within that relationship over a period of time. Now, obviously, anybody can leave a job at any time. We're not talking indentured servitude, but it is a commitment to say that we are going to build on the partnership side this knowledge and make sure that we have it available for you, the client, because it's so important. If it is something that the client says, I want to buy it and not build it. So, but I would contend, and 9 times out of 10, I would look and say, if you're doing that to that level in the contract, I think you need to make that capability within your business. The exception would be, let's talk about microchips. There's two major microchip manufacturers of the very top level capabilities. And the reason I bring this up is this is a very easy example to talk about the other bit. You have mission critical and commodity. Microchips and transistors are incredibly mission critical, but the knowledge to the cost of investment to achieve that, and we see this in the defense space in particular. This is the informing the various allegiances that we have at the moment. That capability at a national scale, at an organizational scale, is absolutely critical. And one doesn't just snap their fingers and buy it, because you're talking about things that have to be invented. So space, microchips, next generation manufacturing, these are all areas where it gets really, really murky what the word partnership and build versus buy. But if you're standard, I would say to anybody, if you can buy it from a market and it's not critical and you want the best price with the most flexibility, and as long as you have at least 3 trusted suppliers, you can buy it because it's a known commodity and they will do it faster than you can do it. And we're beginning to see this in the technology space and machine learning. You're going to see people coalescing on infrastructure providers, just as we have in cloud world, because they can do it faster than you can do it yourself. And they will have more experience and more specialization, but they're offering you a commodity. The mission critical bit, be a government around intelligence, which is obviously mission critical, and the capability of taking and owning a battlefield. You're not going to find many suppliers in that market, so you better have a build partnership that you can trust, and that's where it gets really, really challenging.
Yeah, and defence is hard, isn't it? Because governments quite rightly would like sovereign capability. And there was something recently in the press a couple of weeks back about the UK MOD buying a chip manufacturer because there were some challenges around the business operating model, and they wanted that to stay within UK shores for UK eyes.
Correct, and we're seeing where data, information flows, sensing, all of that is becoming mission critical even more. Where we used to, in the 1990s, it was go to Micron, go to Samsung. You buy them by the lot, and you just assemble, and you focused on the software. So the value chains are becoming, and this is where, going back to your concept, is it procurement or is it demand side? The number of projects in the contract procurement business agility piece that come across that I get involved with, where the person specifying the engineering side of it is, just says buy us something and throws it over and doesn't get into the commercial sets, doesn't necessarily embrace how big of a market is it? What is the resilience of our partners? Do they have, and how important of a customer are we? And these are the things that don't get put into that crystal ball, where you can only understand it is when you start a business relationship. You have to go through due diligence. You have to explore it. So, Glenn, in the business case development, the investment case development bit, the first couple of major decisions are the same in build versus buy. If you haven't gone through and weighed up and done that research, you really don't actually know. And I see that time and time again, that people haven't fully analyzed the market capability and the cost of that competitive function. Is that something I really want to own, and why?
Sure. I suppose it springs to my mind recently about, using Apple as an example, about how they now create their own silicon in-house. And if you look at its pedigree, that goes back to ARM processors and silicon technology, which they started licensing many, many moons ago. But they discovered that actually having that in-house, yet the production, a lot of that is done, is all done externally by third parties, but it's a partnership because they are not only pre-buying capacity, but I remember reading how they were co-investing in some of the production plant facilities because they are pushing the boundaries of their designs, and that to me feels like yes, we are outsourcing the factory location and the staffing, but it's a partnership in operation because we can't design something you can't build.
And in that example, this is the joint ventures. So there's all sorts of these joint ventures, and you find them, and they are joint venture because when you find them, they're a contract with the gives and the gets and some legal and commercial protections, but they aren't actually entities unto themselves. There's this weird, if it was a Venn diagram of, end supplier, customer supplier, there's this thing in the middle where the organizations mesh. And I know folks that have been incredibly frustrated because they find themselves in that mesh and they don't know who is leading, who is setting what good looks like, what is the investment, what budget is this coming out of, which side of the equation. So the few joint ventures that I've been involved with, the act of setting that up and defining the investment and the innovation streams, what do we expect and how is agility, resilience, and risk managed in each one of those? Mm-hmm. I think that's the difference between a good joint venture and a partnership where you're sharing risk on a unique market leading capability. It's when, if it's not market leading and it's just standard, why would you ever wish to go through the cost of standing up a joint venture organization? So that's the leadership trade-off, and where strategy is so important.
So I guess reflecting on what we've said then, again, going back to what you opened with, the strategy is so important to know what we're trying to achieve. We obviously need to have that awareness of our product and our market and what makes us unique, and what is critical to our business. And then earlier you talked about that, if it's buy is relatively straightforward. If it's a commodity and you've got those different suppliers, and almost then build feels like there's multiple paths because versus as you're articulating it, is it a partnership, is it a joint venture, or are we going to build it in-house?
Exactly. I mean, it is literally a decision tree, and understanding those trade-offs. That's probably why people like you and I continually brought into these complex programs. But most people in the senior leadership bit want to have control. So their first inclination is, I want this. I want to have control of it. And whether or not they decide to buy it, they still haven't released that inclination to say, you do it my way. So a way to really not get value from your buy decision is to take your assumptions to be put on that they will need to do it your way when it's not your core capability. And there needs to be a bit of reflection there in that part of the business model. And I think is absolutely critical to the question, are we agile? Do we understand what makes us agile? To go back to your opening, Glenn, of what's the data that says we're going in the right direction? And what are the levers to change that data, to change our path to achieve where we need to go? And then in the for-profit world, it's pretty simple because you're going in the right direction when your profitability and you go one way and your costs go down, right? So profit up, costs down. Yay, we're going in the right way. Everyone's happy. I'm retaining my people. My people want to work with me. My customers want to keep returning. All of those metrics that they teach us in Finance 101 are, pretty easy. The hard part is when it's on I'm pushing the boundaries. I'm doing something that's not been done. Innovation is key to me. This is a core mission critical functionality that I don't trust. I can't give away. I don't want to build competitors through partnership. And that's where the risk comes in.
So if you were talking to someone then about, imagine you bumped into someone and they were talking about a build versus buy problem, what is the first few steps that you would tell them to go and think about, or what questions would you ask them to say, right, to test, have they done their homework to know which direction they should go down?
First is, what's your strategy? And more times than not, they'll say, strategy for what? So first and foremost, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it in terms of business outcomes? At what point in time? You can't get to KPIs, can't get to contract, can't even build an operating model without that. If you are Then the next bit down is, do I already have this capability and I want to outsource it? Is it an outsourcing problem?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's an outsourcing problem. We can spend many bits, but that's in essence, you know what you're doing, and going back into lean manufacturing, it's one way of removing waste and transferring risk, and you want a contract. So fairly well-known discipline, that's on the side. But is it mission critical or isn't it? That trade-off, and is it part of my unique selling proposition, my competitive advantage? If you're in the for-profit world, if you don't know that, then you won't be able to judge how much risk you're going to go. Then you step into that and you're saying, if it is mission critical and I want to outsource it, I'm now down into a special vehicle, a unique partnership, risk sharing, and resilience. If it's mission critical and I want to build it, it's the trajectory of building that capability. The next generation satellite production, the next generation machine learning model, the next generation net zero fuel substance, where we're seeing, especially in the green space, billions invested and billions being lost, right? So, and all of those are supply chain agility integration problems. And then if it's commodity, the question becomes, if you think it's a commodity buy and you don't have a developed market and the geography that you're in, and you want to, in essence, have price transparency and competitiveness, most of the time, going back to your procurement challenge, your procurement people might know what to buy, but do they have the commercial skill to negotiate your best price? And what kind of market? Are you going to do spot price? Are you doing a framework price? Are you putting it on graduated scales of how much you buy? All of that will constrain your agility. So, many of the people that I work closely with, we all come back to, if you buy it, the contract limits the ability to change it without paying more. So do you want a short contract? Are you buying year on year? Or are you buying a 15 or 30-year contract? We're already at the 6th level, and we should have an infographic, Glenn, that says, ta-da! But realistically, this is a known discipline of building a business case. But the thing that causes the most trouble, at least in my world, is we don't want to start until we know we're going to be successful. But when we do, we're just going to. And it's that overly simplistic action without the analysis. And I love that you've quoted How to Get Big Things Done. Those first 4 chapters in any operating model agility change should be base reading for anyone wanting to understand the options for them.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for summarising that, Jason. That's very kind of you. And I think it was an interesting one. And as you were talking through, it's clear why. I mean, obviously, enterprises need to have a good strategy for many, many reasons. But you can see that as being the test against all of those steps in that infographic, which you should create, Jason.
I will.
But that test against each of those steps, against, if we take this decision, is this aligned to, or are we going against? And also using that to validate, is our strategy correct as well? But this has been really interesting and some great examples. So very much appreciate your time today, Jason, to explore that. And hopefully people have found that interesting. If people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you, Jason?
Well, the easiest way is to find me on my LinkedIn. You can find me at Jason B. Sprague. That's probably the easiest and quickest way to find me.
Fab. Super job. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I've had fun making it. I'd be thrilled to hear your feedback or suggestions for topics you'd like me to explore. Email the show at podcast@nimbility.co. You can also check out all the other episodes in the series at nimbility.co/podcast. If you've enjoyed the content, it would mean a lot to us if you could subscribe and rate the show in your podcast app. Your support helps others discover the show and allows us to keep spreading the word. So until next time, thanks for listening.